Psychedelics and self-exploration is to know yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to be easy all of a sudden.
The only stable thing in our lives sometimes may be our sense of self.
You're going to figure out things a little bit faster when we start to share and interact and share our own wisdom.
If we're not willing to engage in the mystery, we're living a small life. Ashley, that is a mic drop moment.
I want to let people know that they're not alone in feeling a little bit jumbled right now. These things are confronting us with those two deep fears. And that's actually maybe something to lean into and be curious about.
Welcome back to the Webdelics podcast. We have with us in the house today, Ashley Booth. Ashley, welcome to the show. We are so stoked to have you sitting here with us.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here on Webdelics.
It's particularly great from my perspective to have you here because we're going to be talking about something that I can't believe we've never discussed before. It is developing a foundation for self-exploration in the psychedelics context. And I can't believe haven't talked about this before because, let's face it, one of the most popular and impactful things that people can do with psychedelics is use them as a tool for deep self-exploration. But as you and I were having our pre-show, I realized a point that was implicit in what you said, which was that if you have no foundation whatsoever for self-exploration, how on earth are you going to be able to maximize psychedelics or any tool for that matter to better your life? And not only that, it conceivably, I would imagine, could even lead to disaster. And so really thinking about what you need to have gone through in order to prepare for self-exploration was something that I felt was of paramount importance for us to explore. And I'm really glad you raise it as an issue for us to dig into. So talk to us a little bit to start off with, Ashley. What exactly do we mean when we say we need to have a foundation for self-exploration, especially in the psychedelics context, but maybe even more generally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, several things come to mind. One of the things that I think back to the first wave of psychedelic use in the 60s and 70s in the US as part of the kind of Western reintroduction, and how most of the people that were trying those things didn't have this foundation, right? And so that was a big drive to look to other cultures, to be able to learn from other cultures, particularly ones from India that have now sort of infiltrated, now our mainstream culture. But at the time, people didn't have that framework. And so while these things break our frameworks, right, and breaking our old framework of whatever kind of standard mainstream American Western thought, right, and you break that, and then it can be so disorienting to not have something else. And so I think that there are these baby steps that need to happen. And so having another framework to step into that might be trying something else on can be so helpful. And that was helpful in my process when I had my very big psychedelic experience that really pivoted me onto this path. I didn't have a framework. And I had just been doing a little bit of yoga here and there, but I had gone to a few Kundalini yoga classes, and I didn't know why they felt so good, but it was speaking to something that I couldn't put a word to. And then when I had that big psychedelic experience, I was like, oh, that's what they're pointing to. And I went very deeply into Kundalini yoga because it was like another framework to be able to help me understand the experience. And so having these different frameworks to explore in, see what fits, see what maybe needs, what doesn't fit, right? And maybe further down the line, maybe it's okay breaking free of the frameworks. But I think when we've grown up with so many different frameworks that then get broken, right? And when we go inside and we have to examine what are these frameworks that are working for me and which ones are not working for me, irregardless of psychedelics, it's a deconstructive process. And so then we have to reconstruct ourselves after that. So that's kind of the way that I'm like thinking about this, both from like a chronological sort of way, but also this like intercultural exchange kind of way.
By the way, Kundalini yoga, that's one of those words that I think that I've heard, but I don't know that I really know what it is.
Yeah, Kundalini yoga is a form of yoga that comes out of the Sikh tradition. It's unlike Hinduism, and this is very high level here, but under Hinduism, it's more of a monotheistic orientation. And it was brought by Yogi Bhajan, who has been since cloaked in quite a bit of controversy in the last few years. But there's a lot of really good knowledge and embodiment practices there that I think are still very valuable to be able to learn. And it's just a way to tune up your nervous system. So it's less about kind of like stretching that there is meditating, chanting, doing lots of kind of like exercises, because the idea is that you're tuning your nervous system so that the Kundalini energy that is coiled around at your kind of power center in your stomach eventually can come released and goes up your spine and causes an awakening experience. So people will have spontaneous Kundalini rising experiences, and those people too also have maybe struggle with that kind of foundation because it's something that just sort of occurred and then they not really sure what to do with it. So it's a beautiful practice.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that points directly to the next question, whether it's Kundalini yoga that you're involved in or some other practice that can prepare you for the paradigm shifts that psychedelics can bring into your life. What are the risks of someone stepping into a psychedelic experience, particularly if they have as an explicit intent self-exploration? And by the way, I would imagine that could even include self-exploration experiences related to things like dealing with mental health issues or addiction or anything like that. What are the risks of you not having laid that foundation in the first place?
Yeah, good questions, Scott. The risk is that you're going to outstrip your coping strategies, essentially, because when you again start to dismantle or deconstruct your frameworks of how you know yourself, that can bring up a whole bunch of stuff, whether it be your trauma or just sort of nihilism or confusion or, a lot of other existential issues. And so if you don't have healthy coping skills to be able to ease yourself through the challenges of that, you can kind of flood your system and become very dysregulated. And so that's what we want to help from a community standpoint, help people, one, if that happens, to help bring them in and offer them tools to help ground themselves, but also that there may be things that we can do to be able to support those kinds of people. So for instance, I was helping someone that had a 5-MeO DMT experience, which is about, one of the biggest powerful experiences that you can have in the psychedelic milieu. And he's on the phone with me, and he had smoked some cannabis a few days after the experience, which is typically a kind of a no-no unless you want to get reactivated. But he didn't really remember not to do that. He got on the phone with me and he's kind of freaking out. And I was like, okay, let's just sit here and breathe. Can you breathe with me? And he's like, I don't think I can breathe. I was realizing that he didn't really even have a practice of knowing how to do conscious breathing. And so that was that's about as foundational as you can get, right? As being able to just be with your breath and feel your body and ground into that. And so, it's partly a responsibility of facilitators that are giving people medicine, but also people in their own practice to say, okay, what are some of the baby steps? Because a lot of people want to jump to the psychedelic, right? Because that's the thing that's going to get them wherever they think they want to go faster. right? But what I've seen as my work as a psychotherapist that does a lot of psychedelic integration work is that the people that have already had a lot of self exploration, doing therapy, doing mindfulness, um, people that do a lot of outdoor activities, those tend to be people that are already have more of a foundation to be able to then do the psychedelic, and then they get so much more out of it. It's so much less destabilizing, and then they can use it so much more efficiently.
When you use terms like dysregulation and similar sorts of language concerning how people can react to these experiences if they don't have the appropriate foundation in place, it's hitting me hard because I was recently reading a book about psychedelic history, and as the author described their own psychedelic experiences, they mentioned that in their research, the two big fears that people have stepping into psychedelic experiences are basically death and insanity. And I know that when I had my first journey, I experienced both of them. I had a few moments of fear of death. I like was imagining my body curled up and huddled away and some helicopter being called out to pull my corpse out because of some allergy I imagined that I had or whatever. But then the fear of insanity, that was the big one. I kept imagining after I had ingested these substances, well, there's no going back now. Like, what if I'm one of these people that is trapped in some psychedelic netherworld forever and ever and ever, and that's my life, and then I die and I'm buried somewhere, right? You hear stories about that, and I think that what you're talking about addresses perhaps one of the foundational fears that people get, because these stories of the bad trips or the people flipping out or having walking into the middle of traffic and screaming or trying to take down planes, for heaven's sake, right, all goes as to the fear of insanity once you step into this. And I'm hearing you say, well, if you want to avoid that, I suppose nothing's preventable, but maybe be a little bit prepared and substantively.
I think there's two pieces of this here. One, yes, there's a certain amount of preparation. And to the other extent, these things are confronting us with those two deep fears. And that's actually maybe something to lean into and be curious about. Because instead of trying to prevent it all away, we have to be coming with a sense of informed consent that no matter what we do, we might cause ourselves to die, and there, when we engage in behavior that is opening things up, there are risks. And yet at the same time, I mean, I can say this because I'm obviously deep into this work for, over a decade now, but there's also a bigger arc that I see, both with myself and in numerous clients. And that's what I try to support people, that even if they have moments of, I've supported several people that have had moments of having extended sort of a psychosis or a derealization. And yet at the same time, even though it was really hard during the middle of it, it was some kind of extended birth canal process that they had to go through that then completed something on the other side. And so therefore part of the preparation is, one, setting yourself up such that you have time and space, as much as you can, to be able to integrate a longer experiences, but also to have people around you that then can help you if things go a little sideways for a while. And so, but all those people that I knew that had those kinds of experiences, they came out the other side and they were a bit rattled, but there was something that they learned. And so I trust in the innate healing wisdom that is in our system, that is guiding us to different experiences that are presenting us with different kinds of challenges, so that we can learn more about ourselves and we can become and choose to be the person that we want to be. So I'm not trying to encourage people to try to have psychedelics as being like, I'm going to make my life easier and more perfect or anything like that. Psychedelics and self exploration is to know yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to be easy all of a sudden. And so I want to, our culture gets, take the pill, you have to be happy, you got to be better, you got to be, whereas other cultures value the challenge in a way that we in the kind of Western suburban comfort oriented life have lost touch with. And there's something that's important in there for our inner development.
It almost reminds me of the way in ancient cultures, a lot of the children that were raised within those societies would have to go through some sort of ritual that brought them into adulthood that was very, very trying, right? And these rituals were symbolic, and they were, of course, humanly achievable, but they weren't known for being easy. And it is sort of true. We do live in a culture, I hate to say it, right, where grade inflation is rampant, even in Ivy League schools. Like, everyone seems to get an A. People pass from grade to grade, even in high school or grade school sometimes, because we don't want to destroy their self-esteem, or we don't want to hold them back, or we want to meet performance metrics that the schools may have because of various legislations in place. And then that bleeds into how we interact in the world, being devastated if bad things happen to us, because we sort of haven't developed that inner resilience that comes from struggles. And it's almost like, in the absence of these rituals, or as we move into this more comfort-oriented space, I'm almost hearing, based on what you're saying, then the psychedelic experience can become even more valuable, but maybe even provoke some of these mega challenging experiences, because if you've never had any before, anything can be mega challenging. And not only that, but you may need mega challenging to get you out of that comfort oriented or self-delusional rut that you can be in.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this a lot. I mean, I'm a millennial, and I've been researching and looking into just books and people that are writing about my generation has, what kind of challenges we have compared to older ones, and then the maybe Gen Zers that are, it's like there's some unique things about our different generations here that have created different types of problems that we thought we were solving, right? By like keeping kids indoors and making sure they're not going out and getting abducted and like all these things. But then there's this low resiliency, this low grit, and this constant pressure to perform and be able to that there's this one track that you need to go on. So yeah, I mean, again, this is just, yet another structure, right? And each generation's going to have their own structures that they've absorbed, right? And so, I think part of this exploration process is really because you want to know what's true for you, right? And that means that not any one system is going to be 100% true for you. And an analogy that I really like is that, throughout the course of our lives, we're writing this sort of handbook of our life, or like a book of wisdom of our life. And yes, if you get everything from yourself, you're going to have like a couple of lines. But if you get, if you talk to more people, they're going to give you a paragraph here, and some other person's going to give you a paragraph there. And you're going to figure out things a little bit faster when we start to share and interact and share our own wisdom. And so I think that's kind of what we're doing here, and as we expand into these waters that our Western culture doesn't have our framework for, we're just piecemealing it from other cultures, or bootstrapping it ourselves. It's a tricky thing to be navigating, right? And so, being fully aware that we're adolescents right now in this work, both in the exploration of ourselves and the technologies. We've lost our own the technologies to know ourselves in the West, and so and I think the last thing I'll say just on this piece is just that I want to let people know that they're like not alone in feeling a little bit jumbled right now, because we don't have that, right? And I feel it myself, right? And things are crazy all over the place at the moment. And so it's a hard time to try to find something that feels stable. Um, and so sometimes psychedelics can offer that, because we can find something that's deep inside of us that is infinitely stable. And yeah, but it's hard, and maybe it's okay that it's hard.
There is something profound in understanding and calling out explicitly, like you just did, that the only stable thing in our lives sometimes may be our sense of self, and that ability, even if it's suppressed, to know and understand who we are and what we are at our core. And if you don't even have that, then truly in tumultuous times, your life is going to be addled with instability. Now, I'm going to brag on you for a minute. We didn't just have you on this show for no reason. I mean, I meet all sorts of cool people on the street, and I would want to have them all on the show, but they have to be special to be on the Webdelics podcast. And part of the reason that you are so special, and we're going to talk about those other reasons too at the end of the hour, is that you were recently named one of Webdelics' top 100 thinkers, thought leaders, influencers, researchers, etc., in the psychedelic space. And when we had this pre-show conversation, you talked a little bit about some creative and singular thinking that you have with regards to how that foundation can be laid, that, as I understand it, takes into account a lot of the issues that you have just talked about, right? The fact that we've sort of grabbed these traditions where we can without any holistic context for them because we lack any. And then you also have the therapeutic background to be able to bring some thinking from that space into a framework that you have developed. So I have to know, what is this framework? How can it help us be able to prepare ourselves for self-exploration generally, but obviously specifically towards the psychedelics experience?
Yeah. Well, I will present it visually for the people that are watching. But I recently wrote and illustrated a book. And so this book is
I like
called
those illustrations, by the way, I have to say.
Thank you. It's called Quieting the Storm Within, an illustrated introduction to your parts through internal family systems and beyond. So I'm a psychotherapist. The predominant modality that I use is called internal family systems, which is a framework that's been around for several decades. It was started by a man named Dick Schwartz. And here's the glib example of how I explain it to people, and how the book sort of starts out, is that sorry, people outside my window. Okay. So the main way that I explain this to people is that we all have these different kind of perspectives in our minds. So one part of us might say, oh, I want that donut. And another one part of us might say, don't eat the donut, it's unhealthy for you. Right. So we're all pretty much aware of that type of struggle within inside of us in some capacity. And so what this model has come to explore is that if we start to treat those different perspectives almost like their own separate subpersonalities and start to ask them questions. Hey, where did you think, where did you come up with the idea that donuts were unhealthy? Well, mom said that they would make us fat and we don't want to be fat. Oh, okay, you got that belief system from mom. Okay, and then, hey, for you, what's so good about having the donuts? Oh, I love eating the donuts. The sugar makes me so much feel better, and then I feel calm after I've had this food, and it really helps my nervous system just feel a lot calmer. And it's like, oh, wow. So it's not just this like critical little moment that's happening. There's like a whole backstory. And so what this framework has been growing and growing in popularity, both for trauma therapy, but also for psychedelics, because a lot of this work, we start to interact with and explore sort of inner childlike parts of ourselves, inner wounded parts of ourselves, right? The parts of ourselves that needed attention back at some time in our past and kind of still need it now. They're like kind of trapped at that time. And when people do psychedelics, they often interact with that wounded inner child. And so this work gives a very intuitive framework of how we interact with our inner system. And it's called internal family systems is because Dick Schwartz was a family systems therapist, and he was trying to figure out how to help people by rearranging their family systems and creating, figuring out what the dynamics were. And then when he started noticing people's parts in their heads and these different personalities, he started realizing that they interacted kind of like families. Like there would be kind of like the stern parental figure and the kind of like wild rebellious child part, right? And the like the nurturing part. And so it was like this little internal family. And so that's why it's called that. And so that's kind of this. So one, that framework is really beautiful to just start to understand and pull out some of the chaos, because sometimes we're like, why am I doing this to myself? I keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And then the swirl of everything, the voices, in our heads that are just arguing all day long. And when we can start to pull them out and understand what each of these parts is in service to, because they all are in service to something. They're all in service to a deeper core human need. And when we can get clear about what need is needing to be met, we can find much more maybe constructive or effective ways to get those needs met rather than maybe old patterns or old ways we've done it. And so that's kind of the foundational piece of this, that we have, our minds are not this uniform thing, but our minds are actually multiple. And this has been proven in a lot of other frameworks, a lot of other cultures. And so Westerners just don't typically think like that. But once you kind of get you start to immediately feel like you're like, oh yeah, there's that part of me that wants this thing, and that other part wants the complete opposite thing. And so it's very intuitive in that way. The other layer beyond that gets even more pointing at what we were talking about before, like that deep inner core of ourselves, is that there's a really interesting thing that happens when you ask all the parts to step to the side, and then you can help them feel safe enough to step to the side. And then eventually people tend to say, well, that's not a part, that's just me. And the essence, and what Dick Schwartz and the IFS Institute and every therapist that's been doing IFS has seen is that when you get to that core, what they call it a capital S self, is that self has a lot of similar qualities between people. It's compassionate, it's creative, it's curious, it's calm, it's connected, it has a lot of clarity, a lot of C words. This essence seems, and this is me more speaking from my own experience, and is corroborated by a lot of other people in the field, but that essence seems to be the gift that is sort of born inside of each of us. And that is an infinite well of resource to be able to navigate the trials and tribulations of life. And so we're not trying to get rid of our parts because they help us survive and get our human needs met, but we are also this deeper, dare I say, spiritual core. And we are both. And so this framework helps us navigate both the human needs that we're trying to get met with this deeper sense of spirituality that can be this resource and guiding light.
People who might be intrigued by this modality due to the intuitive sense that it makes, as well as the fact that it is advocated by researchers and credible therapists, might recoil a little bit when they hear that last part. They might be saying, okay, I'm hearing something that was scientifically credible, that was clinically credible, and now they're talking about spirituality. And I notice, not to call you out, unless you want to call me out, but to just sort of raise that you did even hesitate for a minute, and I suspect it's because you know how people can react to this, to using the S word, the spirituality. How can you frame this for people, or can it be framed in a way that might make them feel a little bit more comfortable if the S word is something that scares them or that they don't self-identify within themselves?
Yeah. Well, the context I'll put around that. So I was a marine scientist and oceanographer for 9 years in research at Stanford and UCLA before I made the shift into psychedelics. And so, and before that, well, in the midst of that, I was a pretty hardcore materialist atheist. But the thing that is the through line between that old career and that old life and what's here now is a deep sense of curiosity. And so
Mm.
if you continue to be curious, allow yourself to follow that, right? Because don't believe me, right? Go inside and see for yourself, because that's the
Mhm.
most authentic and true thing that you can do. Is and so don't believe, right? Go inside and see what happens, right? And use that curiosity, because I think, and that's what we're talking about here, all the way, back to the beginning, right? Is an exploration into ourself.
And I have to say, like you, for many years, I was a hardcore materialist atheist, like decades. And you put it so well. Going into the work of self exploration got me as I connected more and more deeply within, and then took it to a completely different level through psychedelic experience. Spirituality took on a different meaning dimension. A lot of my resistance to the word spirituality was that I associated it with people, keeping it totally real, that were kind of flaky, or that just sort of
Mhm.
used it almost as a lazy person's substitute for religion, that there really wasn't any rigor associated with a lot of the people that I encountered in that space or with a lot of their thinking. And why I appreciate hearing you sharing a little bit of your own professional background here is that it's hard to say, oh, this is someone who has no scientific rigor in their background. Oh, this is someone who just is kind of flaky and is incapable of critical thinking or of high level hardcore thinking, or has never been exposed to thinking that might be critical of spirituality. Quite the opposite. Then
Mhm.
thinking about this through that transformational lens and thinking about the family systems process, how do you apply that in your life if you are thinking about self exploration more generally, but again, specifically, let's say for whatever reason you are feeling called to, or some people would say the plants are calling you to, a psychedelic journey. If I'm ready to move on, getting more involved in family systems thinking as a way to prepare myself for a psychedelic journey or more deep exploration, what does that look like practically? I understand the theory, but in terms of like steps.
Yeah, so internal family systems can be a helpful tool in approaching psychedelic work. One, because the model itself is very consent oriented. So we might have a lot of parts of us, right? Some parts that are like really eager to heal and they want to get right into that medicine right now because they want to feel better. And then there are other parts that are like, I don't even want to go near that because I think I might lose my mind, right? Or I might die, right? And then there are other parts that are like, we can't go there. That's going to bring up all of our shit and we can't handle that, right? And so we need to know all of these different parts and help all of those different perspectives. One, understand, how can we do this safely? Why are we even doing this? What are the possible benefits? And how can we all get on the board together to maybe try something new and lean in? And so, because if you're not going to get full buy in, at least from your system, you can have what's called like a backlash, right? Like some part of you kind of, and I see this a lot when people want to rush into their medicine experiences because understandably, because they're struggling and they want relief. But there's also things that they've been suppressing that didn't get a voice before they rushed into the experience. And then that thing, has a fit because it wasn't listened to. It got freaked out, right? And then your system's overwhelmed and blended with this part of you that got really dysregulated. So it's a really great way to approach the work in this consent sort of way. It's also a helpful framework to be able to know, like when you get into these spaces, how to interact with the different parts of you that are going to potentially come up. Because here's the other thing about this work is that it's very non-pathologizing. So I'm not saying, oh, that critical part of you that's always giving you a hard time and telling you you're not good enough. I'm not going to tell you to, hey, get rid of that part. I'm going to be curious about that part. Hey, how are you trying to help? Oh, you're trying to help by motivating her so that she doesn't get criticized by other people and feel like a failure again. So you're trying to, use the whip to keep her so it's a prevention from what that criticism looked like. It was even worse from the outside. So that just got internalized. And so I see how you're trying to help. I see the benevolent intent behind your behaviors, even if the behaviors have turned into something that's quite hurtful. So we're interacting with different parts in a way, it's a way to start to bring more compassion and curiosity and a little bit of distance so that we can, it just helps us understand who and what is our system made of.
We're going to talk about the other end of the psychedelic experience and what internal family systems might be able to do with regards to that, specifically integration, in just a moment. But Ashley, I'm dying to know. Inquiring minds demand an answer. How did a scientist working in oceans end up just randomly pivoting into the psychedelic? So you're laughing, so I know there's a story there. I want to hear
a story. Okay. I know. I can't. There's no way of getting around the story because it's just too funny of a pivot, right? So the short answer is Burning Man and 5-MeO-DMT. The longer answer is, moving from, a passion for nature and animals and the oceans and also, but at the same time, having my heart feel like it was breaking in that work because I got into it because I wanted to study and learn and protect all of these things that I feel are so precious. And yet at the same time, most marine science work is documenting the decline of what all those beautiful things are. And so it's depressing work. It's totally necessary, important work. But when this transition happened over maybe a 10-year period, but, started having psychedelic experiences at Burning Man, feeling like my curiosity was opening up, feeling more in connection with some playfulness and community and beautiful things that I wasn't fully embodied in. And then that led me to doing psychedelics in a more ceremonial context. And I had a 5-MeO-DMT experience that was the most profound experience of my life. And it opened me to a realm of divine connection that I can't put words to. And it was so important that it felt like a crime to me that other people didn't have access to this, to be able to use this as a way to be able to help them find that sense of reconnection with something so deep and profound. And so a few years into that, after that, I started the Southern California Psychedelic Society. called the Aware Project. Back when there was maybe like 4 psychedelic societies in the whole world, and ran that for 9 years, hosted over 98 salon events. It spread to San Diego, and then through that got connected up with MAPS. And because of my science background, they hired me as the LA clinical trial site hired me as their study coordinator. And then they allowed me, even though wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I thought I might get into coaching or therapy. And they're like, why don't you come along to the MAPS therapist training? And I came along to it, not having hardly any experience with it, but I just kind of was very talkative and engaged. And they're like, Ashley, you're clearly suited for this work. Go back to school now. And then we'll help you with your hours and we'll get you through this process so that you can be a part of the team. And so you got a second master's degree and then came back and became one of the only pre-licensed clinicians on the whole MDMA clinical trials, as far as I know, which was a huge honor. And just dove deeper and deeper into this world, from research to my own experiences to the playful places like Burning Man to ayahuasca ceremonies, to the whole gamut. And so and what has helped, why one of the other reasons that this shift came about was because when I looked around the world and there was just so much bleakness in so many different ways, I saw hope in psychedelics. I saw hope that there is maybe a gift that's being given here that is a catalyst for our reconnection and moving out of a paradigm of separation into a paradigm of interconnection once again. And so I don't know how long that transition is going to happen, but I am patient and I can see the bigger picture of where we're going, and I want to be contributing to that in any way that I can.
That's really beautiful. And it is amazing how often in both the psychedelic and in the non-psychedelic space, increasingly you're hearing people talk about this shift in how people view our relationships with each other as well as with nature, disconnect, extraction versus reconnection. And in a way, there's a circularity to your experience that I'm hearing, going back to that original work that you did with marine life and marine systems all those years ago, that are declining because we don't view them fundamentally as part of or connected to us at that foundational level. Ashley, everyone says that the experiences that any individual have while on a psychedelic journey are the beginning. They're part of the transformation, but they really only come to life, and the extent to which they come to life, by the way, is tied to integration. So talk to us a little bit about whether internal family systems or other foundational self-exploratory work can help with integration as an effective tool for making real sense out of all of these big things, maybe even not so big things, that people experience when on their trips.
Yeah. When I think about integration, I like to think about making a balanced breakfast, right? That of different types of things to make sure that you're getting kind of the different elements that we need to be able to do this work. So sometimes part of it is being able to do emotional processing and to make sense and make new patterns and structures and ways that can help us. And IFS can certainly help with both that emotional processing and making space to, if we had some sort of inner child experience that was really upset that came up, and then you need to like continue to process those emotions that came through there. And then other parts of that balanced diet are things that are getting out of our heads, processing through our bodies, and a friend of mine said this, and I love this. He says, we don't have to reinvent healing. We've been doing it for thousands of years, right? And I think about how we've been, gathered around fire pits, chanting and stomping and wailing and grieving and storytelling, right? Singing. Those are the things that have our DNA knows what to do, and that is how we have traditionally practiced moving through hard emotions and hard times. And to a certain extent, we've lost that. We don't have in these sort of cultural ways anymore, and so people have to kind of piecemeal it. Like, all right, I go to my dance class here, or I go, get some hugs here from this friend. But if you can dance or move or shake or stretch and breathe or sing, that's a big one that has been a big part of my practice. I wasn't a singer. My parents are pretty much tone deaf, but I just felt like I needed to use my voice, and I've just been learning songs and just singing them to myself. And I can't tell you how important it has been for me, both psychologically, but also like when you sing, you're also literally like relaxing your vagus nerve. So it's like your system, you're helping your system from the inside out. So those other somatic practices are a huge, big piece of this too. And then there's just sort of this like meaning making system. How do we make meaning of what is it? What the heck are we doing in these bodies on this planet? What's even going on here, right? And we likely are not going to be able to get the one true, only answer to that, but engaging in the question, which then engages you in the mystery, is actually the more important piece of that, because I don't know what's going on here. But I know that I felt things that science in its current way can't explain. And so instead of feeling like I have to stop at materialism, I continue to be curious. And that curiosity leads me to wonderment. And that's a really beautiful place to live.
Might some people, though, respond to that by saying, well, what's the point of exploring meaning if the only thing I'm going to get is more curiosity and mystery? Right. If these aren't helping me with some sort of resolution, what is the point, Ashley Booth?
Yeah. So a couple things on that. One, we have to be okay with the paradox. One is I can create my own meaning, right? And I talk with my clients, I have them go through a values exercise where they identify what are their values. Because, and this doesn't have to do with spirituality or anything else like that, what do you want to stand for in your life, right? What are you going to make more important than your excuses, right? And so and maybe from an IFS perspective is like, how do we help the parts of ourselves that are maybe doing some sabotaging to help them so that we can be our values? And so that is a way of making meaning. I am being in service to something bigger than myself. I want to be a kind person. I want to be a compassionate person. That would make me feel good that when I look back at my life, that I was a kind person, right? And at the same time, this is the uncomfortable thing about being alive. And I think we try to make too much meaning. And, I think this is what religion has kind of boxed us in a bit in many ways, is like, this is what it is. And it's not we know everything. It's all in this box. It's all in this book. But it's not. There's so much more. There's so much more mystery. And that's an uncomfortable place to be. It's uncomfortable being in the mystery, but that's the practice. That's the practice, because if we close ourselves down to not allow ourselves to engage in the mystery anymore, we live in a small life. And so we have to work the muscle of being okay, of stepping into the unknown and the anxiety and the excitement that can come with that.
If we're not willing to engage in the mystery, we're living a small life. Ashley, that is a mic drop moment. And I have to say, thinking about everything that you have shared with us today, perhaps that lands the hardest. The mystery of life, thinking about what the world would be like if we did truly understand everything, then sort of taking what you said another step further, well, why even stay alive at that point? There's nothing to be curious about. There's nothing to grow into. You truly are at a place of stagnation. So you just basically remain the spiritual or the mental or the intellectual or the creative equivalent of a marble statue forever and ever and ever and ever until you die, or you accept and embrace that. And so thinking about psychedelics as well as the preparatory tools that you might need to build upon in order to have that foundation to use them as this basis for self exploration prepares you to open up to the full expansiveness of the mystery. And with that, at least for me, the full expansive intellectual and creative and exploratory possibilities. And wow, what a thing to ponder as this episode moves to a close. If there is something that you didn't get a chance to say that you want to, or something that you want to reinforce, Ashley, what might either or both of those things be?
I think it's remember the bigger picture, because, it's so easy to fall into, oh my God, I got these bills to pay. Oh my God, the political system's crazy. Oh my God, and just, um, we got to pop our heads above the clouds sometimes, right? And just say, there are bigger processes going on here that we can't even fathom, both in terms of our own growth process, but also the course of history, the course of the evolution of our consciousness. It helps me to remember that I am in this little moment in time. And yes, I might have these like things that are stressing me out, but like when I can pop back into that, there's something that feels peaceful there. And like there's just, and I hate to say it, but kind of like a bigger plan or a bigger unfolding that's happening. And when I can see it that way, I can lean back a little bit more and be in wonderment of what's unfolding, and maybe play a little bit more in it.
And I'm all about playing in life and having a little bit of fun. Thank you so much, Ashley. I know that folks who have been watching this or listening to it are dying to know more about what you're doing right now and where they can find you. So please lift the veil, give us that information. We can't wait anymore.
Yeah. So the book, I'll hold it up again. Quieting the Storm Within can be found on Amazon. The website for the book is ifsandbeyond.com. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok, also IFS and Beyond. The website has like free worksheets, and I've made cute little things like these mugs with the characters on them that because I I wanted them myself, and I was like, well, I'll just see if anybody else wants them. It's just like a little reminder to be connected to yourself, regularly, and to care for your parts. So I made those. So there's some cute things like that on the website, and then on my other professional level, I'm a trauma therapist and psychotherapist, licensed clinical social worker, and my website for that is ashleybooth.net. I also do a lot of, obviously, psychedelic integration work, ketamine work, and do a lot of consultation work for therapists that are wanting to start to learn more about psychedelics and maybe learning how to bring them into their practice. And also people that are curious about psychedelics that don't really know how to kind of navigate things, and they just need a little bit of some coaching around that. So those are sort of the things that might be interesting for your audience.
They very, very much are interesting. Ashley, it has been truly an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, and thanks to Webdelics. This has been really lovely.
It's been a genuine pleasure. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to us on your favorite audio platform or on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, in addition to just taking in the fun artwork that Ashley showed you in that book, make sure that you press the thumbs up and subscribe buttons. And then also make sure that you leave a comment right below the captions because we want to hear from you. Then you will also see in our captions and also on our website that we have a number of different social media platforms that you can follow us on. Please do follow us on, and you will see some highlight clips from this episode as well as past ones so you can learn more, as well as tons of other fascinating content. And if all of that isn't enough, please go to our website at webdelics.com. That's webdelics.com. Sign up to our email list. You'll get some great additional information that's curated and credible via our newsletter. And then, above all else, be sure to come back next time for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.